someone is deceased, but when they're deserved, I mean, it's, what can you do? Melba Ketchum, to put a fine point on it, was a flim flam artist. She was a total con artist and built built Wally Harmson out of $500,000 essentially. The whole thing was a scam. It's as you blatantly, transparently a scam as you can get. And I won't go into all the details. We could spend a whole night just talking about that. So everything that she claimed, all the claims of hybridization between a human and a subhuman, a human female, which was why she claimed the mitochondria was human, and the other nuclear DNA had signs of hybridization with a subhuman contribution. Is just total punk. There's no basis for it whatsoever. And there have been very good treatments. If you want the definitive treatment, was written by Haskell Hart, who, if you're curious about her antics and her claims to results, just read his book and it'll clear the air. Then I thought, arriving on his white horse was Brian Sykes, who was going to save the day, and turn this debacle around. And it got off onto a good start. For it seemed there were a little evidence of naivete. I said, let me run interference for you. We met and discussed his project and so forth. We were down in Salt Lake. He was on a book signing tour for his immediately previous book, DNA USA, or USA DNA. I'm not sure which it was, but anyway. I said, let me run some interference, because hair is very persistent in the environment. It's a very durable, proteinaceous, product, appendage. And so people pick up hair in the field and they don't know that they could have picked up just about anything out there in the forest or the pasture, the barbed wire fence. And I said, so if you've got a limited budget, which he did, and it was expensive to do these samples, to run these samples, let's direct your attention to the most likely candidates. No, he didn't. He was professing to be kind of the purist. He didn't want to impose any bias, any preconception on what Sasquatch hair might look like. Although anatomically, I mean, I'm an anatomist, and I can tell you from the look of hair that is distinct, cannot be attributed to any form of wildlife that's out there, that is clearly primate, but seems to be distinct from human. And under the circumstances in which it's found, many times it's associated with footprints or a sighting or whatever. And so there's at least a chance that it's attributable to that event. But let's focus on those. I mean, it should be pretty straightforward to determine whether it's human or non-human primate. But the rest, the only other candidates for a hair so long would be, things like bear or a wolf, canid, or maybe some ungulates, the longer hair of the mane of an elk, for example. But, you get down, you can eliminate all the rodents and all the small mammals have hair that's no more than a couple inches and that have fur, that have this underfur with the guard hairs extending. Guard hairs provide the mechanical protection against abrasion, and the underfur provides the insulation, the thermal layer. Primates don't have that distinction. It's all just modified guard hair. They've lost any underfur, and other mammals as well. I mean, it's not that unusual, but the point being, he said, no. So I said, well, let me just forewarn you, if you throw the barn doors open, all of the barnyard animals will come running through the barn. And that's what happened when he published his paper. He was able to successfully get DNA, which was itself seemed to be a breakthrough, got DNA from every sample that he included in his study. Every sample. And every sample was identified readily as belonging to one of those barnyard animals, including human. And but nothing that didn't immediately attribute to these other recognized candidates. Well, so my problem was, hey, that's contrary to my experience. My experience tells me that you're something smells fishy in Denmark.
Uh-huh.
Because one thing then became clear when the paper came out and he had an appendix that had all the specimens listed and their attribution and source. There were specimens I had sent, some of these gold standards, because I went ahead despite his protestations and I invited people to send me their hair first. Let me screen it and let's focus on the most likely. And I sent, 4 or 5 good samples. I talked to other people who had sent samples, none of which were acknowledged in his paper.
Oh,
And so
okay.
when you have a conclusion that 1 through 100 samples are readily attributable to common forms of wildlife, that's a very different conclusion than if you had 100 samples and 10 of them, you just could not for the life of you get DNA from those samples. And when you put them under the microscope, they all lacked a cellular medulla, which might account for that problem. And they all have exactly the same morphology that's distinct and resembles a primate, most similar to human. Well, so I have to put this big question mark after his citation and say, well, I don't think that was a well-designed experiment. I think if he didn't get DNA, which is often the result when we send in very promising hair samples, if he didn't get DNA, he didn't include it in the sample.
Sure. Well, it does seem strange to get 100% success rate.
Absolutely. And that was the same red flag with Melba. Every sample she's allegedly received from various investigators, enthusiasts, yielded DNA. And it was all Sasquatch. She had all these different samples that were from Sasquatch. And of course, the centerpiece was this piece of hide from California from Justin Schmea, which is a whole second debacle upon a debacle. So it was really set. I mean, and it delayed. This was the thing that really irked me is that, because I kind of closed down our efforts. I thought, well, here's a person who has the wherewithal, the means. She has she's bankrolled, she's funded. And so we kind of put all of our field collecting enterprises on hold for a couple of years and to have, this extreme disappointing outcome as a result. So that was frustrating period.
Would it be so if to Dr. Sykes's wanting to kind of keep it blind to some degree, right? Couldn't you do like a blind study to where it's like, there's some BBR human samples or a different sample, and then here's the ones that we think are most likely.
There were actually a couple people who sent in known samples just to see if he identified or his people would identify them correctly. And, and that was it happened. I mean, they did identify them. I mean, I think the results were and the effort was legitimate. And I don't know for certain. I mean, I know for certain there were samples that were not enumerated in his study. Whether they were omitted intentionally or there was just some, they slipped between the cracks and didn't get logged or whatever, or didn't make it through the mail, who knows? I don't know. And that's why I say, since he's passed, there's no recourse to investigate that or to challenge that result and maybe get a follow-up clarification, which would be helpful. But so,
and it kind of sets it's like you had mentioned earlier, the getting tenure before you investigate it, right? And because of the criticism, you had mentioned the one gentleman's criticism of it's just stories or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then you get stuff like that gets highly publicized.
Oh, yes. The negative results always get publicized. When on those, there was the last big flap was the FBI. Through a Freedom of Information Act, someone discovered that the FBI had a report where they had actually tested a sample of hair that was submitted by Peter Byrne, although he couldn't remember ever having received any reply from the FBI. I was impressed that the FBI actually tested it and didn't just circular file it right off the bat. But it was deer hair. Now, deer hair, guard hairs of deer, all of the servants have this very distinctive, it's frothy looking medulla. It's like it's
Uh-huh.
vesiculated, and so it looks frothy like bubbles, and it's quite a pronounced medulla that takes up a considerable proportion of the width of the hair shaft. You can take a deer hair, stiff guard hair, and hold it up to the light and tell
Uh-huh.
that it's a deer hair. So
Sure.
for him to, whether it was sincere or disingenuous, who knows? It might have been just like, like you were saying, to send something in to see if they're actually doing a serious analysis. Obviously, they did. They concluded it was deer. So, but see, that just feeds into
Right.
this apprehension, this stigma that anytime someone does a serious investigation or analysis of the evidence, that it turns out to be just some commonplace, some conventional artifact or feature and has nothing anomalous about it. And so that's unfortunate. There was another one, the only other one that I'm aware of it, where hair results were published, and
Mhm.
someone had submitted hair from up in the Northwest Territories, I think it was from the Yukon, to the forestry agency or fish and game, one of the federal agencies. And I can't remember now if it was on the Canada side or if it was on the Alaskan side. But in any case, the point was the federal agency did the analysis, and the biologists involved, they identified it was muskox or something like this. It was just,
Mhm.
and so they published a paper, which got, I mean, they wrote up a paper, which got published readily. It was
Uh-huh.
another sample attributed to Sasquatch, but hey, it was just
Right.
run of the mill, animal. And so these people just keep chasing pipe dreams. And so it's,
Mhm.
and yet, I tried to get Dr. Henner Fehrenbach, who he was taking the lead on the hair. He was a microscopist with the Oregon Regional Primate Research Center. And so he had the equipment to really, get good photomicrographs and do the analysis. And he had kind of a self-taught trichnologist, a hair analyst.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, it's not rocket science. I mean, it's anatomy. And if you
Sure.
can tell there's a certain art because there is a tremendous amount of variation, even across the body surface of an animal, as to where the hair originated. As there are differences in the characteristics and in the cuticle pattern, which is one of the features that's discriminating. But identifying, discriminating between orders of mammal is pretty straightforward. They're pretty distinctive differences in the dimensions, in the cuticle structure, in the medullary structure, and so it's not rocket science. But in this age of molecular analysis, DNA analysis, no one's satisfied with just the anatomy. They wouldn't even publish a paper if it was just an anatomical depiction and write up,
Sure.
descriptive write up. They would demand that the samples be tested for DNA. And so
Mhm.
until we can get past with that acellular medulla, sometimes it's very challenging to get DNA at all.
Mhm.
But when on the rare occasions we do, and the result is human, because not enough is done, that's where the big, bucks would
Right.
come in, and to have a lab that could devote the time and energy to do an exhaustive study and be absolutely sure and replicate it with multiple samples, be absolutely sure you've got the full analysis to identify those very rare and scattered markers that would distinguish a very closely related species from us.
Mhm. Sure. Well, it's fun. I think it's the true crime of America, right? We're all really obsessed with DNA for all things now,
Yeah,
right? It's like
yeah,
if there's like someone's on trial and they have the DNA, it's like, oh, they're
yeah,
guilty for sure,
sure,
and if not, they're like, I don't
yeah.
know. And we want to like close our eyes to kind of everything else that might be. It's like that's like become the gold standard.
Right.
Um,
And the public gets a
for
kind of a skewed perception of how those studies are carried out because, on TV, they have it done in that episode, you know?
right, right. By the
And
next commercial break,
yeah,
they have the
exactly.
results.
And it's always, you can get DNA from, the most obscure source, whether it's a cigarette butt on
Right.
the floor or,
Uh-huh.
it's just,
Yeah.
It's not always that straightforward. It's a bit sketchy.
Extra shots. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. It was a lovely time, as always, and we appreciate your time. So, thanks so much for being here. I am going to leave you with a couple announcements. One is that I am really excited to announce, if you've heard on the show, I've been talking about my epic absurdist satire, Pirates of Appalachia, for some time. It truly is epic. It's going to be 2 books, and I'm going to be releasing those in all book forms, but also as a serial on Substack. So if you head over to Substack, I'll have the link perhaps on the screen, perhaps just in the description in the pinned comment. But if you head over there, you'll be able to follow along chapter by chapter. I will be releasing the whole book. If you want to sign up to support me, support the show, I am going to have some extra content on there. I actually always have all these notes in my work that go to my editor, so that if he thinks to change something, it says this is how it plays out later. This is where I did the research, whatever stupid little joke I make to myself. Mainly, I'll have on there. I'm going to have a lot of fun little bonus content on there as well. And I'm going to do a bunch of readings. So that will be on there for the paid customers. But if you want it free, you will get the whole thing free as well. Both books will be on there, and I'll have ordering links. Right now, they'll probably be pre-order. Depending on when you watch this, maybe it'll be the regular order, but you'll be able to get the entire book too if you want to skip ahead and read the whole thing and read it on your e-reader, read a paperback or a hardcover version. Whatever you would like. I'm trying to meet you where you are. I mean, you can meet me where I am, and that's the bar, usually, and predominantly Monday through Thursday. On the weekends, I drink at home. So, but if you would check that out, certainly I would really appreciate it. Also, we do have a member section on the YouTube if you'd like to go on there and get all the shows way early. And I'm going to start doing some monthly live streams for the members as well. Anyways, thanks so much for all your support, everybody. Cheers.